Assalamu alaikum. My name is Fedra Wazwaz, and I'm doing today's presentation and going to title it because it appears that my student enjoyed my discussion on this topic so much that she is going to actually be giving a talk herself based on those she took from my writings tomorrow at Celebrate Mercy. As I said before, I will start introducing my students, my patients on a trailer that I have created on my YouTube channel called Faith Reflections. And if you go there, you will find that I began a playlist called My Students, My Patients, and I. And so let me introduce you to my student so that you are, and then I'll give you my talk, which she will be sharing the notes of tomorrow. Share screen. Okay, and so here is my student. Her name is Zaynab Ansari. The site is Celebrate Mercy, and this will be on May 3rd. And more than once, she has been very impressed with my writings and my videos, and she would come to Celebrate Mercy. And she's not the only one. If you go to Celebrate Mercy, quite a lot of them actually end up following my writings. In fact, both of my books, the entire themes that I have written, writings that I have done, they literally took it and started teaching it on Celebrate Mercy. It's just hard for them, to accept that they learned something from someone who doesn't have a PhD, and to be honest and say, we actually were inspired by this person and this writer and the themes and the ideas she brought forth. So they do this sort of like gymnastics where they look for people with PhDs or people who are famous and then tell them to give the talk, and then they'll start to like praise that same person, that other person, whereas you'll be given the same talk and the same analysis locally, and they would not even like acknowledge that it impacted them, acknowledge that they valued it. So let me take you to the writing itself. This began earlier than 2018 from some individuals that I will mention here. But let me first begin, because I keep taking the same theme and just every year, like I like to review some of my writings. Sometimes people will give good feedback that you then incorporate that feedback into your writings. So I shared this, as I said before, and I keep sharing it again. And this was again in 2020. This is when my first book was published in 2020. And I mentioned that dua is the best psychotherapy. And I have heard it said by various writers and personalities that prayer doesn't change or provoke God to act, but it changes the person making the prayer. In another discussion, people have said that prayer is the brain of worship. So I'm just kind of including different views on what the function of prayer is. C.S. Lewis says, I pray because the need flows out of me all the time. So it's about a need that we turn to God. Rather also waking the sleeping, it doesn't change God, it changes me. So that need sometimes is a wake-up call to turn to God, to awaken us and to change us, to beautify us, to purify us. But also, it is because there is a need that we want fulfilled. It's not just because, from an Islamic perspective, we do have a need that we want fulfilled. But as Sheikh Sha'rawi said, Again, I've been doing this more than once, and I have it elsewhere, that sometimes that dua is the response to the dua, or the supplication turning to God, may not be what you hope for, but since you use the words or the prayers of the prophet, like you didn't say, and I have a talk on this in my, it's coming up actually tomorrow or this weekend, wanting what you can't have. Like maybe like you prayed for something specific and you didn't get it, but that's why I emphasize using the prayers of the prophet, because they're done in a way that surrenders to God, that he knows what is best for you. So sometimes you may pray for something, but you use the prayers of the prophet, which says something like, give me what is best for me, you know. And so what happens may not be pleasing to you, but it's actually what is best for you. And so now you're going into this cycle, or if you will, I shouldn't say the word cycle, but this process of beautification and enlightenment, where who you are becomes in harmony with what is best for you in God's eyes and in God's knowledge. I hope that makes sense. Again, ad-du'a mukh al-ibadah, and this translates to supplication or dua as the core of worship. And reflecting on both of the two similar understandings, I think prayer to God, as I said, it's not a complaint to God, it's a form of psychotherapy. As I said, you know, if you're using, of course, the dua of the prophet, not praying, being attached to what you're praying for, as I'll mention in a video here on hope and obligation. But if you are praying in a state of surrender, then it's really a form, not just of worship, but a form of enlightenment and growth. Again, where hope now becomes a two-way process. One focuses on the prayer made, expresses their feelings and thoughts fully to God in the process, in the journey. Prayer can rewire a person's brain, as this communication with God will be a form of psychotherapy. And this is where my student, Zaynab Ansari, got her idea from. I don't really mind. I just wish that they would be a bit humble. I mean, they were following teachers that had all these name and fame, and they were not benefiting from them. And then God put me in their path, and all of a sudden they're all benefiting from me. And they're just unable to be honest that they're benefiting from my writings and my teachings. Prophet Muhammad, upon him peace and blessings, left us many supplications he used to make. So I emphasize those supplications because they really take us from hope in a one-way direction into hope in a two-way direction, where your heart is being enlightened, your mind is being rewired, you know, and then you start to like become internally as a human being, beautified within, purified, beautified within. So at times we rush to make the supplications and focus primarily on the end results. This is where, again, I will discuss wanting what you can't have. This was written much, much earlier. However, try to make the prayers today without focusing on the results, but more the journey on where you're at in the journey. Excuse me, journey or where you're at in the journey. And I keep using that phrase by one of the individuals who said, you know, the person on top of the mountain didn't fall there. You know, there has to be some climbing, in other words. There has to be some struggle. It's a journey. There has to be some effort made. There are a few booklets on the Prophet's prayers that one can make and focus on the supplication itself. And here I raise some questions, which is, What did the Prophet, upon him peace and blessings, ask for? What words were being used? What feelings are being expressed? How does the Prophet, upon him peace and blessings, connect to God via the supplications? What thoughts are in the supplication? How often was this supplication made? And this is a conversation, you're always chasing rumors and gossip. But here you have the Prophet's dua, which is better than he said, she said. You got what the Prophet said. It should always be above, he said, she said, and rumorville. When was it made? Like, what was the time? What was the need that this supplication was made for? And so on. The more you reflect on that supplication, again, you're going away from rumors and gossip and who said who loves who, into now you're focusing on the words and the supplications of the Prophet that he's having with God. So, how like we all like to spy. I could use something. We all like to the Subaru Black Book. Like we all like to look into people's black book and to spy and to eavesdrop. Well, here you got all the supplications that the Prophet made, or most of the supplications the Prophet made in his conversation with God. Aisha, may God be pleased with her, was so intelligent that she wasn't like running around eavesdropping who said who about what. She was eavesdropping, what did the Prophet say to God when he was in prostration? That's her intelligence. She wasn't running around checking out people's black books and trying to figure out, what did this person say to this? And did they say to this, to that? But we heard that she was prostrate, like when the Prophet was in prostration, speaking privately to God. She was so intelligent. She wanted to know what he was saying in prostration. That's where her mind was. What is he saying to God? A lot of us, we're more interested in rumorville and the gossip coming out of rumorville than we are interested in what did the Prophet say to God at this moment, at this time. The Prophet, upon him peace and blessings, would supplicate to God, saying, I ask you, Allahumma, because why God is near. And so he spoke with him as though he was near. And he's closer to one more than their jugular vein. So he would speak to the Prophet as though the Prophet would speak to God as though he was very near. To make my speech truthful while angry or pleased, and to have the same aim in poverty and in riches. I'll mention this here more in the one on wanting what you can't have. But he's a world-renowned scholar, and he said in one of his aphorisms, never you're elated when given to, but unhappy when withheld from. You may infer from it you are still in your dependency and your lack of sincerity in your servant. But this is why the Prophet's prayers are very beautiful in that they really take us out of being attached to things, to material things, and more into creating a healthy relationship with God, where he's the Lord, the master of the universe, and we are his servants. We see this again in the supplication or dua mentioned in the Quran by Prophet Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist, upon them peace. So John the Baptist in Arabic is Yahya, and it says Prophet Zechariah. It's also Zechariah in Arabic. And this is Walam akun bidu'a'i Rabbi shaqiyya. And never have I been in my supplication to you, my Lord, complaining in an accusatory manner. So his prayers were not accusations, were not prosecuting, were not questioning, but more driven out of a need, and a hope that is in both directions. Because we learn again later on that his son, John the Baptist or Yahya, and ends up becoming a martyr. His Yahya means life, so he ends up becoming a martyr, but also Prophet Zechariah becomes a martyr. Now, when I wrote about this, here I'm writing about the prophets. If you've been listening to Ghazi, a lot of people will say, I've been going through fertility treatment for years, and I finally had this child, and now they're 18, and the Israeli government killed them. You've probably heard many stories in this recent genocide by Israel in Gaza. So you probably heard more than one. So here I'm listening to people's story, and I'm trying to share with them in Quran without being condescending or mean, or treating them as though they're need to be infantilized. Instead, recognizing their strength, their faith. But we all, when the first, the tragedy first strikes, we have that moment of struggle before we regain our faith. So you're sharing with them kind of like in community, not as their teacher, but what I learned from the Quran, Prophet Zechariah and his son Yahya, and his son also gets killed. So he's his only child. He raises him, and then he gets killed. And you see a lot of stories popping up where the woman's heart or the father's heart or both are breaking from this trial. Now, people from Rumorville read what I'm writing here, and then they went ahead and they said, Fadwa couldn't have children, and so therefore she wrote this because she wanted to have children. And they went on and on and on and on, and it, they peppered it and spiced it and cooked it in all different permutations. And they never really sought clarification on why I wrote this. Or said, what do you mean? Or what is this about? Or can you clarify what you intend here? And some assume that you're talking about them, that because they struggled with infertility and they finally had a child, that you're putting them down. I'm like, I'm not even thinking about you. You're never on my mind. I don't even have the time to get into Rumorville and have the conversations with you, because conversations with you is literally like an invitation to Rumorville. But anyway, this is the point of what this was about. Listening to endless stories of individuals who prayed very strongly to God. Finally, God gave them a child after 10, some 20 years. They were so happy, so elated. They raised this child for God's sake. Okay, so it wasn't like they were not grateful. They were grateful, and they raised their child for God's sake. And then they wake up to the news the child is killed by Israeli soldiers or Israeli settlers. And then the pain and the trial of that pain is overwhelming. And so I put before people the stories that God puts before us in the Quran as a healing. And never have I been in my supplication to you, my Lord, complaining in an accusatory manner. This is acknowledging the faith of the individuals who were patient all these years, turning to God all these years, praying to God all these years. When we pray and follow the supplications of the prophets, as I said, we rewire our perception of life accordingly, And instead of feeling a perception of lacking in life, we feel an internal feeling of surrender and connection to God. In addition, and it took me again some time, it's a back and forth with my wife, it's a woman, again, I admire her much. Life is not about getting married. So again, I'm not in any way pointing any condescending, patronizing finger to people in Gaza. They are teachers. We have been very much inspired by their strength and their faith. But just sharing what I learned, if it can be of benefit to any. It's through a process of interaction with the tools of compassion, understanding, listening, sharing, consultation. One not only brings out the best in other family members, but one develops oneself as a more rounded person. Again, hope is in both directions, not one. Buying all the things that one doesn't need, because there will always be something that one does not or cannot have. By going into excess with materials, things, one has to keep providing the funds to facilitate the accumulation of things that one does not need, or things that do not inspire a better life for all concerned. By not driving oneself in this way, by accepting the blessings one has, there is time to relax and enjoy the company of loved ones, and time to meditate upon the teachings of the Quran and Allah's creations. There is time to fulfill one's inner needs as a human being who cannot thrive solely on material things. Owning one's health because one is negligent and has succumbed to the notion that there is nothing else meaningful in life than, thriving at the top, where you grow materially, but internally there's no growth. And how many, men or women who upon retiring from work lead a short life because they define themselves purely through their work. Remember, here I'm referencing, I didn't call his name. He was, I think, part of Microsoft, I'll put that in the description. He gave a speech when he passed away about life is the best, or death is the best reminder. For whatever reason, the name just escaped me right now. Always doing something to feel that one exists. This leads to leaving one's soul behind. The soul needs attention through prayer and periods of reflection and inspiration. Take care of your soul. So the supplication also, it doesn't just rewire your brain, but it's a moment to just time out, as Prophet Muhammad, upon him peace and blessings, taught, to reflect on the teachings, prayers of what is being said. This is why I said, try to kind of jot out, like kind of analyze what is being said, because we're always analyzing, as I mentioned, rumors, but you have what the Prophet said to God. And instead of reflecting on that and psychoanalyzing that, not as a way like psychoanalyzing the Prophet, but as a way to benefit oneself, as Aisha did. Where she put her head very close, trying to eavesdrop. What is he saying to God, basically? Remember, when you're praying to God, to monitor your thoughts and feelings, so you are praying in this state. And never have I been in my supplication to you, my Lord, complaining in an accusatory manner. It's okay to be in need, to express vulnerability. Just be mindful you're not accusing God of failing you or not providing for you. Instead, asking God for your needs. And certainly don't say God humiliated me or God shattered me. Say, God, I'm in need of you. Say, God, that I'm in need. I have these needs, but don't say God humiliated me or God shattered me. The one thing that prayers do is teach us how to communicate to God our needs, our fears, our insecurities in the right state of mind, a mind and heart that receives his blessings. Sometimes people will pray for impunity or that they can escape accountability, but that's not actually good for the soul. The Prophet during Ta'if said, لَكَ الْعُتْبَةِ حَتَّى تَرْضَى. So for you is the right to reprimand. So here's the Prophet. For you is the right to reprimand until you are pleased. So again, hope grows in both directions. It grows eternally in the mind and it goes in the heart. Now, a lot of people are constantly doing like role playing, and they never really benefited me in these teachings. Wherever you go, they are creating like these, what you would say, plays, where they're playing some sort of scene, and then they keep like sending these individuals to role play and say, this is who you were at this point in time. And then and then they'll take the things that I am teaching them, and then they'll claim that they were teaching me. Well, that's not evidence. That's called role playing based on your assumptions and your arrogance. Evidence is to show where you taught this in pictures or my writings, where I did not know this before you, that you have not been able to present, other than, these skits and schemes and role playing. I have not seen any evidence that you can provide where I didn't know this material, and then you were teaching it before I was teaching something totally opposite. I haven't seen any of that. And certainly don't say again, God humiliated me. The one thing that prayers do is teach us how to communicate to God our needs, our fears, our insecurities in the right state of mind, a mind and heart that receives his blessings. Try to read those supplications in the Quran. Tomorrow is Friday, and sort of reflect. Although we can use our own personal prayers, the reason that I hesitate is, be mindful if you're like making personal prayers, but you're not attached to the end result. Like Prophet Zechariah prayed for a son to inherit his teachings because he had a hope to continue to be kind of like Prophet Ibrahim, to continue to be a teacher and pass on his knowledge to later generations. But he was not attached. So sometimes God answers your prayer. Sometimes God doesn't answer your prayer. But sometimes God answers your prayer for only a short span. In the case of Yahya, and that's why I wrote this. He'll give you, for example, a son. But again, some scholars said when it was mentioned to name him Yahya, that his name will, which means life, that he will be given eternal life, and that Zechariah knew that he's going to be martyred. Yahya was going to be martyred. So the idea here is about using the prophet's prayers. You can use your own personal prayers if you're at the state of Prophet Zechariah where you're not attached, because sometimes what happens is God answers your prayer and that gets you into a state of delusion. And here I'm not pointing fingers at anyone, just asking you to reflect on a general reality where you'll start saying stories. Well, after 10, 20 years, God gave me this son or daughter, and they're pious, and they're this, and they're that, and you'll be worshiping God again, not with the understanding of surrender. And so what happens is the child is taken away, and then individuals will be in a state of tremendous agony. because they were like so happy and so elated, you know, and this is where it gets to be careful about that, where whenever you are elated when given to, but unhappy when withheld from, you may infer from it you're still in your dependency and your lack of sincerity in your servitude. So when God gives you that, some of us, again, not pointing at any individual in particular, become so elated that when that same blessing is taken away, then we'll get into the mode of God humiliated me or God shattered me. So it's to, I personally prefer to use the prayers of the prophet, because I'm not at the state of Prophet Zechariah or any prophet, you know, and we all tend to be when we pray for something, and then God takes it away. We go into from being elated to being kind of upset, like, why did, you know, God give me this and then take it away? So if we train ourselves to pray the way the prophet's supplications, we never build attachment to things. We build attachment to faith and becoming stronger in faith with God. Because our ego colors our thoughts and our feelings during times of insecurities. While we may be praying to God, we may be praying like Satan prayed to God to grant him respite, to call Adam and his progeny astray. We even see it now, like, for example, Israel, because they prayed to have a state. And so now they're getting into a state. So you can see that elation, you know, but again, it's not a hope that's going in both directions. It's a hope that just they don't really care about which law of God they transgress, as now that becomes their object of worship, the golden calf, if you will. Whereas here, again, he waited many years. He was very old, Zechariah, when he got his son, Yahya. But even as he was given the son, even as he was given like his son, he was named, he was told that his name will be Yahya, which is a very, by the way, uncommon name. So it's not lost on me when some individuals keep running around town and suddenly this person's Yahya and this person's Yahya and this person's Yahya and this person's Yahya, and they're trying to like play these dumb games. It's annoying, it's exhausting, draining for them to keep playing these games, which are not evidence of anything other than them playing games and being attached to their own delusions, if you will. And so to get to it, sometimes our prayers are not a form of psychotherapy, but a form of food for the ego, and a mirror of our envy, our hatred, and our arrogance. And you could see that, you know, when God gives you something, how do you respond to those who God did not give to them what he gave you? And I began this theme with the discussion of a story in the Quran about the man who was given the gardens, and then the man who God did not will for him the garden, but he gave him faith, and how that discussion took place. So sometimes God answers your prayer, but you're not really sincere, and it becomes, again, a mirror of our envy, our hatred, and our arrogance. And at a certain point, God places before you someone who is growing internally, and you're only growing externally, and then you come face to face. You know, I personally believe that Israelis are in that situation where they're coming face to face with, you know, Palestinians, in particular the people in Gaza, and they're coming face to face. Here they have all this abundance, blessings of faith, and the others are like, they're thinking that they're thriving. And you could see the same kind of logic coming out of Israelis towards the people in Gaza. For the prayers to be really beneficial, they must be holistic, meaning the feelings, as I mentioned, that's why you should know what the thoughts, the feelings, and they need to all be in harmony with each other, the mind in harmony with the emotions, and in harmony with the spirit and coming from the heart. They all need to be in harmony with each other, opening your heart in a state of gratitude. Remember, dua is actually a confession of gratitude, recognizing your need, recognizing God's generosity. So it's a state of gratitude, not accusatory complaint to receive. So I used to make, as I mentioned, my own prayers, found it more beneficial to use the prayers of the prophets. And as I mentioned, I write this more than once, and I expand on it by teachings of other teachers. I had one, let me find it. Here, I found it. I was going to mention this in the next clip, but I'll just mention it again here. This leads to the question, what if we don't get what we want, or what's we supplicated for, or do we stop supplicating? Some scholars teach supplication repels the Lord's decree. This leads to people supplicating and supplicating. They don't get what they supplicated for, and they stop supplicating altogether. That's why I say sometimes don't pray for a particular thing unless you're at the state of Prophet Zechariah, because then you'll be attached to that thing. But use the prayers of the prophets. And God, and if you, it's kind of like trusting God to know what is best for you and letting him to give you what he knows is best for you. It's hard to go in that direction, but this doesn't mean you shouldn't pray for other things. But if you're praying in a state of gratitude, not a complaint, and you don't go from elation to then saying, God humiliated me, that's okay. Just be careful at your state of mind when you're making the dua. How does one reconcile this and help people? Sheikh Ramadan al-Bhuti said in one of his lessons on Learn Then Speak, a questioner asks me, and he says, you once said the supplication doesn't repel the Lord's decree. And Bhuti said, I say, once again, supplication is part of the decree. The decree repels the decree. Supplication is not something outside the decree. Our master Umar, this is the companion, God be pleased with him, when he was approaching Amwas and heard about the plaque of Amwas, like there's a place that it had spread inside Amwas, and he didn't enter it. One of the companions then came to him and said, are you fleeing from the decree of Allah? In other words, enter it. What are you worried about? Sometimes, people have this false understanding and they're testing God instead of recognizing God is testing them. I'll discuss that later. He replied, I'm fleeing from the decree of Allah to the decree of Allah. You have to take the means that God, made permissible for you. In other words, this fleeing of mine and returning to Al-Madinah, is this outside the decree of Allah? Let's say someone has fallen ill. I ask Allah to cure him, and he's thus cured. Is my supplication not part of Allah's decree? Was it not recorded in Allah's knowledge that I would supplicate to him? Was it not in Allah's knowledge that he would answer me? What is the decree? It's Allah's knowledge of what will happen. But sometimes people, again, are testing God, psychoanalyzing God, instead of recognizing God is testing them and how they should, or what they should do to pass that test. The hadith, only supplication repels decree does not mean that supplication is outside the decree. This is again what the teacher is saying. Rather, the meaning of this hadith is that man must supplicate and not say, by Allah, why should I supplicate? Allah had decreed that such and such will happen. It will happen, whether I supplicate or not. If Allah has decreed that such and such will not happen, I could supplicate for 20 years and it still won't happen. So this is how some individuals think. So you have to sort of let people speak so you can better clarify the Islamic teachings. This is how a lot of common Muslims think. So bring this hadith to them to refute this false understanding. So just as the illness is part of the decree, the supplication is part of the decree. Any prayer that I do by my choice is part of the decree. My fasting is part of the decree. My reading the Quran is part of the decree. My seeking refuge in Allah is part of the decree. Thus, the decree repels the decree. That's why I said, if you want, it's by God, for God, and with God. And Allah, because He has power over everything, so you need Him to remove whatever trial or tribulation you're in. And Allah's decree, glorified and exalted is He, can be repelled. And this is the meaning of His statement, glorified and exalted is He. Allah erases whatever He wills or endorses it. The master of the book is in His hands. A lot of times people get into this type of thinking is simply because they're testing God instead of recognizing they're being tested by God. And I'll get into that in a different lecture. But I wanted to say, I did this today because my students, I want to end with, Zaynab Ansari was impressed, inspired by these teachings. And I mentioned here that I recommended for her. Because a lot of times when you write something, initially you used to go to Sunni path. I found it difficult to remain. She told me to stay, so I had intended to leave. It wasn't so much that the teachings were problematic. It was that I don't think that they respected the teachings. It appeared like I understood the teachings more than they did. So they were quoting scholars like Ramadan al-Buti. But it felt like I understood the scholar more than they did. That I was able to grasp a lot of the teachings from some of these scholars that they were listening to before me, while they were fighting on other issues that are totally unrelated or not beneficial for the community. So when I started to listen to this teacher, Ramadan al-Buti and others, and I would be starting to share some of these insights. They knew of him way before I did, but they never brought any of that insight forth and started to spread it. Once they started to see me write about these things and make videos, blogs, then they all jumped in and started to claim that this was their initial writings and that they were teaching me these things. And even got into more ridiculous permutations of these teachings, where they started to then make claims about my life way before I came to Sunni path, and then how without Sunni path I was astray. And they could not seem to provide any evidence other than getting a mob in the community to role play scenes. And then they would come and this person would say this, and then that person would come say that, and that person would come say that. And then a name like Yahya, which is very uncommon. I've in my 50s and I rarely hear people named Yahya. Suddenly, it's like you see it every day. Somebody's reminding you of Yahya. And this is basically, again, how they play their games. So, as I mentioned, my student, Zaynab Ansari, I met her, she was teaching at Sunni path. And then I met her in person at ISNA. We didn't really talk much. We never had this back and forth. The most personal conversation we got in when I decided to leave Sunni path, because I felt like it was hard to, I'm a direct speaker, to be direct and to speak without them always throwing the adab card in your face. And she told me to come back because I had gotten like really upset at something, and I responded in a way that they did not feel comfortable with. So she told me to stay. And you stayed, and you were staying, trying to like be respectful to the point of where that respect was then misconstrued and misunderstood. Now it went into that because you no longer were like saying, hey, I don't have time for this. This is usually like my personality style, is I tend to be like direct and just say, I really don't have time for this, click. But you just sort of like put the person on mute, or just would not really care too much about what, you know, they were saying or what they were talking about. And so they're reminding you of something, and they're not aware that the whole time they were muted and the notification setting was off. And so I learned about this because from certain things being reminded over and over again, and then you go and you start searching and then you find it's referencing something that you never really read or never considered because they were always on mute. And the notification settings were always muted. And, you know, it's really, you know, they have their understanding on this, which is fine, but I was open to wanting to know what their understanding of this, which they were not open to, both Zaynab and, again, the individual here. His real name is not Yahya. His real name is Michael Coleman. That's his name. I just figured that out. I'm not sure if Michael is referring to him or Michael's referring to someone else. I don't really know. But Yahya, there is a constant, like kind of a innuendo to him. And Michael Coleman is his real name. In any case, she'll be sharing my notes on my writings tomorrow, May 3rd, the Friday Gems on Celebrate Mercy. I'm glad to have helped light the way for her, Mufti Mink, and others, everyone in Rumorville, because they seem to be, their heart is inclined, and I showed them more than once how they responded, like some Zionists responded in their arguments, and, you know, thriving and wanting to, you know, how they looked down at people as failures and broken, and you showed them, you're like, here, look what the Quran says. Look what you said. Which character are you speaking? Which character are you reflecting? And, you know, they fight ferociously back with, again, those skits. They find people in town, and then they start to role play. And then they tell you that you were like this. You had absolutely like zero faith. And then we came and we taught you faith. And then everything that I'm teaching them, that I'm writing, that they're now claiming through skits, through role playing, not through providing evidence, that I learned from them. This is literally how they're responding, which is ridiculous because I used to have a program in Brooklyn Park, the Northwest Broadcasting. It's a local TV station. And I used to share exactly what I'm sharing now before I knew any of them. Before I knew any of them. In fact, these individuals who are claiming to have helped created a major fitna between me and my ex-husband by nonstop, constantly creating fights. Nonstop, constantly creating the very rumors that they're creating now. They were nonstop creating rumors then. And so they're not able to supply any evidence other than plays that they find characters to role play because they're unable to accept the reality of things. And they're constantly making claims of a faith that I never bore witness to. I never saw from them. They were constantly fighting on foolishness. And if anything, this is my teachings that I have shared with them over the years and that they have taken and are now trying to flip the story and claiming that I was somebody who was just running in protests, chanting, and I don't recall ever chanting. I used to be giving talks, and I would always use the Prophet's teachings and talks ever since before I came to Minnesota. So these are individuals who are unable to accept the truth of who they are. And they are unable to provide evidence that supports the truth of what they believe in. And they're unable to respond with evidence when someone reaches out to them respectfully and asks them for the truth, for the story that they believe in. I reached out to Zaynab Ansari. No response. I reached out to him with his wife and then to him with his peer. Said, is there evidence? Is there another story? Again, no response. It wasn't like I'm running away. I came openly and I said, I'm hearing hints, shade. Do you have evidence of a story to support your story? Nothing. You asked her, do you have evidence? She's like, my life is turned upside down. I am a widow now. I lost, You're like, okay. And so you respect their answers and you go on and you keep working on your project. And you ask him and he's like, blah, blah. And he came up with this understanding that because you listen to Habib Sakaf and you listen to this teacher, therefore you're trying to get close to me. I said, okay, I believe you. So you went through all your Facebook posts, all your tweets, and you checked every single reference, retweet to Habib Sakaf, and you deleted it. And you went through all your notes, deleted them. And I said, here, gone. Are we now good? And so you just shut the door and you went on with your project. And you thought you solved the problem because you gave them what they want. She just said, my life is turned upside down. I'm a widow, and she just tried to kind of skirt the situation. It was like, okay, if that's what you want, that's fine. And then the same thing. And he went with, you're listening to this and this and this and this. And I didn't add anybody. You followed some teachings that people follow. Then you just went ahead to his profile, figured out who he's following, and block. I said, here, if I see anyone that in any way, shape, or form is connected to you, I'll block them too. I hope that solves the situation now. And you continued with your project, and you're very content and very happy, and you're writing and you're sharing all this. And the next thing you know, they're still complaining, and they don't come right out and tell you what it is that they're complaining about. They're like giving you all these little, hints here and there, and you're supposed to connect the dots and then figure it out. But what really hurt me was they took my writings, work that I worked on for years, for decades, that I researched, that I spent at times overnight, spend considerable time writing, researching, reflecting on. And then they just claimed it all, and they just stole it as their own writings, as their own teachings. And they could never provide any evidence at all that they ever taught this before I ever wrote on this issue. They could never provide evidence. Even Hamza Yusuf. Suddenly he's speaking about things and he's claiming things. And just because he's famous, I'm supposed to like say, okay, well, it really belongs to him. No, it was not your teachings. You did not write about this. You now reflected on this theme and this understanding after I wrote about it. But that was not your writing. That was not your teaching. You were constantly obsessed with some other, going on tangents and some other non-beneficial things. I was the one who was listening to people. I was a mentor since I was 10 years old, listening to people, how they see the world, how they interpret the world, and looking for patterns and writing them down years after years after years, reviewing the Quran, talking to people who are open and have a lot of insight. I feel very happy that I came across the teachings of Ramadan Bhuti and some others. But these individuals were, again, I spoke with them, reached out as a human being with respect. Wasn't like throwing hints at them openly. And they both skirted and ran away from being respectful. I followed the teachings of Ramadan Bhuti. If you hear something, go to the person and say, I heard X, Y, Z. Is this true? Or give me your perception, talk to me as a human being. Neither her or him responded as a human being with respect. In any case, then they started to, nudge, and make serious accusations, which forced me then to kind of give them a taste of their own medicine. And here I'm not giving a taste of their own medicine, but just clarifying my thoughts, which is that somehow I'm interested in this individual. Totally not compatible with who I am, how I see the world, how I speak, how I comprehend things, just totally not compatible. Like a more compatible person for him would be Zaynab Ansari. She's not a widow. She has parents who are converts. He has parents who are converts. They both have similar life experiences. I think they would be compatible for each other. So instead of throwing hints, I'm going to be open, direct, respectful. Zaynab Ansari, why don't you reach out to Abdul Karim Yahya, why don't you reach out to Zaynab Ansari? I think you would be a compatible couple for each other. No nonsense intended, no shade, cade, spite, malice, just pure sisterhood, brotherhood, advice, wishing you the absolute best for both of you. And again, no nudge, just very direct. This is how I speak. Very direct, put everything on the table. You know where you stand, where I stand. You are both compatible for each other. I would advise that you get married. Say when a woman secretly loves a man, she obsesses with what is the word? I'm like, she'll attack a woman who she feels or she thinks is interested in him. And so maybe you secretly love Abdul Karim Yahya, and that's why you're throwing these hints and this shade and you're interpreting things that it's not there. So no need to be shy about it. You're a teacher, he's a teacher, you're perfectly both compatible for each other. I wish you the absolute best. And I pray that God brings your hearts together and you get married and you have highest children and you move on, you become preoccupied with what is beneficial for you. If I could move, which is God. and you move on with your life and allow me to work on my project. And if you want to be inspired by the project and come up with your own lessons, all I ask in return is that you give fair attribution to your teacher who inspired you to those teachings. I thank you very much. And I pray that the advice that was given to you without hints, shade, and role playing and skits and telling this person say this and this person come here and this person, pretend you're chanting and this person come say this word and that word. And then this teacher pretending to be the one who's teaching and on prayer, the role, the play that you put out every so often in the community to replay nonsense. It's open, it's direct, it's on the table, where I'm coming from, where you're at, and how I see you, what I'm thinking, and accept this advice. If you don't wish to accept it, then I ask you to exit gracefully. When you share my teachings, give fair attribution to your teacher. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.